Both of those U.S. Air Force hospital planes have now landed at Rhein-Main Airport in Frankfurt.
In the year 1979, the Iranian Revolution had just begun. But to fully understand what happened, we must go back to the beginning. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the revolution, arose from the political scene in 1963, leading the opposing campaign against the Shah's program, which promoted women's rights, equality in marriage, and authorized religious minorities to take office. He was then arrested in the same year for insulting the Shah. Khomeini was then released 8 months later and exiled from the country. The first demonstrations against the Shah, the monarch of Iran, appeared in October 1977. There were very few of Khomeini's militants, but the numbers quickly grew into the thousands. These demonstrations were closely followed by the first casualties from the major protests against the Shah.
تمام این بحران‌ها را امریکا ایجاد می‌کند.
These were formed by many Islamic students and leaders from the Iranian city of Qom, who were frantic about a controversial story in the press that they found extremely slanderous. The army was sent in to control and disperse the crowd, but many students were killed in the process, and this only created more controversy and protest against the Shah. Knowing that he was soon facing revolution, the Shah turned to the United States for help. The Shah had no problem doing so because of Iran's strategic placement and because it was the largest and strongest country situated in the Persian Gulf. The Shah had been partners with the United States for a long time, so gaining their favor was not so difficult.
I fully expect the Shah to maintain power in Iran and for the present problems in Iran to be resolved. The Shah has our support and he also has our confidence.
He was repeatedly assured by the National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, that they would back him up completely. Brzezinski was assertive to the fact that the Shah would receive military support if needed. President Carter's support was invariable, even though they knew the Shah's establishment was a lost cause. From the present day, looking back on those events, many Iranian citizens agree that the absence of interference from the American government were accountable for Khomeini's conquest of the Shah. In late August 1978, the Shah assigned a new prime minister. This prime minister reversed some of the monarch's policies, which included closing all the casinos and abolishing the imperial calendar. But none of these did anything to change the political situation in Iran. By the time September had arrived, the country's stability was quickly deteriorating and protests were becoming more and more frequent. In an attempt to counter this effect, the Shah brought out martial law, which banned public protests. Against all odds, on September 8, 1978, Iranian troops fired on the protestants and dozens lost their lives. This terrible day is referred to as Black Friday in Iran. As time went on, more and more workers were also protesting, sending the country's economy into darkness. Seeing that Khomeini was becoming a nuisance to him, the Shah prompted Iraq to deport him. So on October 3rd, Khomeini was sent to Kuwait, but seeing that he was refused his entry into the country, he was sent to France. By December 1978, the Shah's situation had degraded to such an extent that the Shah was losing control, much to his dismay. Finally, on January 16, 1979, he was obliged to leave the country with the Empress. This event was followed by a general display of happiness, and every trace of the Shah's ascendancy was obliterated in record time. Within a few days of the monarch's departure, the Prime Minister granted the return of the opposition leader, Khomeini. After being welcomed by millions of ecstatic people, the leader of the revolution officially declared Iran a Muslim republic on February 12, 1979. The revolution had become victorious.
Relations between Iran and Iraq worsened when the Ayatollahs took over. The Iraqis claimed that the Iranians were refusing to implement border agreements, and the first skirmishes broke out. In the first big incursion, Iraqi tanks rolled into Zain al-Qaus on September the 7th. 2 days later, they occupied the border village of Saif Saad. On September the 17th, the Iraqi army captured a group of border posts in the south, and then the war began in earnest. At the beginning of last week, Iraqi MiGs bombed 10 Iranian airfields. The next day, the Iranians hit back, and 3 British workers became the first foreign victims of the war. The first major territorial gain came last Wednesday, when Iraq claimed the capture of the town of Qasr Shireen in the north. Qasr Shireen was the first Iranian town of any consequence to fall to the Iraqis, and our visit here today is the first independent confirmation of its fall. The Iraqis say they have no long-term intentions to occupy Qasr Shireen. They'll use it, they say, to force other concessions out of the Iranians. A senior tank officer explains Iraq's intention in the sector.
But why we advanced, if you ask me why we advanced to this distance inside Iran, we advanced to this distance to force Iran to recognize that Zain al-Qaus, Saif Saad and Shatt al-Arab is Iraqi according to the laws, according to the rules, according to the international behavior.
But you will be holding on to this Qasr Shireen sector until the Iranians acknowledge that Zain al-Qaus and the others are yours.
That is right. We don't want Qasr Shireen. It is Iranian. We are just coming here to force them to recognize that and to be reasonable enough to see that they cannot do and they cannot have it there all the time.
Iraq's next major gain was the border town of Mehran, but an Iranian counterattack now puts that in doubt. Then the fighting switched to the vital Shatt al-Arab in the south. The Iraqis crossed the waterway and besieged the port of Khorramshahr. They advanced too on Ahwaz, capital of the Iranian oil province of Khuzestan. And in further fighting, the Iraqis are pressing on the communications links from Tehran to the oil fields.
Down with the Shah, the people chanted. Shah Pahlavi, his full name was the man who had control over Iran for over a decade. He was placed into power by the United States and was one of the biggest Western allies in the Middle East. However, in 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah and eventually replaced the former democratic state with an Islamic republic that was ruled by Ayatollah Khomeini, the leader of the revolution. So back to the video. You see that he has all the people marching in the street. These are supporters of the revolution. In less than a year, these people, along with the support of Khomeini, would help push Khomeini into power and totally transform Iran into a radical Islamic state. There were a lot of consequences in the country from these events, and differences in beliefs. The country was not all on the same side. Some were persuaded to be against the revolution because that was the way they were educated, and many in the public followed those who wanted change because they believed it was necessary. They soon became enemies, and a quote by Izar Nafisi, talking about the revolution, she said, "Those who are close to us when they die, divide our wars. They're the wars we're living, which we find in one way or another succumb to, and then there is a demand for God, imaginary friends of foe, secret, constitute that can truly divide a nation. Political issues can lead to, as well as poor leadership, to wars and the political that may have some good for some, but it's wicked for some.
More than 30 years after the Islamic Revolution, Iran's internal politics are still bewildering the mainstream media. For many, it's not even clear what form of government Iran has. The country is a republic with elected institutions such as a parliament, yet it's also a theocracy with a number of religious institutions. In theory, the mixture of divine rule and popular will could work. However, in practice, the system has transformed Iran into a kleptocracy with many factions fighting for power and influence at the expense of the wider population. In this report, we will delve into Iran's version of the Game of Thrones and explain the country's internal political power struggle. Following the 1979 revolution, two factions struggled over the political future of Iran. On one side was the Republican faction with various ideologies ranging from secularism and socialism to communism. They believed that the legitimacy of a government depended on popular will. On the other side was the theocratic faction. They believed that legitimacy stemmed from the divine regulations. This blend of republicanism with religious authority is what forms the core ideology of Iran. Shortly after the revolution, by means of a referendum, a new constitution was drafted and ratified. The Islamic constitution was based on the works of Khomeini as described in his book Islamic Governance of the Jurist. The new constitution remodeled the country and laid the foundation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Immediately following this, two things happened. A war broke out with neighboring Iraq, and a profound dispute erupted within the ruling elite of Iran. Under the veil of war, Iranian clerics, led by Khomeini, moved against their republican countrymen. Over the course of the Iran-Iraq war, Iranians witnessed Saddam's war crimes and atrocities from without, and severe oppression and persecution by the Iranian clerics from within. It is during these confusing times that a number of Iranian guerrilla groups emerged. At the same time, the leading Republican politicians and cultural figures were arrested, kidnapped, and tortured. The Communist Tudeh party was the first to get banned when nearly 10,000 of their members and sympathizers were arrested in 1982. Over the next few years, the other Republican-based parties were shut down. Anyone who spoke up against the system disappeared or was publicly executed. In 1988 alone, an estimated 30,000 Iranians were executed by the authorities.
La dame avec le sac en bandoulière, arrêtez de courir. La dame avec le sac, arrêtez de courir. Et toi, ne cours plus.
Madame, pourquoi courriez-vous?
Je suis en retard. J'ai cours dans 5 minutes.
Oui, mais faut pas courir comme ça. Quand vous courez, votre derrière, il fait des mouvements. Comment dire, impudiques.
Eh ben, vous avez qu'à pas regarder mon cul! Mais putain, c'est pas possible. Où qu'on se place, on voit toujours la même chose. Tu parles d'un cours d'anatomie. Le seul truc qui dépasse, c'est son gros nez.
Vous devez vous présenter immédiatement à l'université centrale. Tous ceux qui s'absenteront seront renvoyés pendant 2 semaines.
Nous ne pouvons pas nous permettre de nous comporter n'importe comment. C'est du sang de nos martyrs qu'ont poussé les fleurs de notre révolution. Avoir une conduite indécente, c'est piétiner le sang de ceux qui ont donné leur vie pour notre liberté. Aussi, je demande aux demoiselles ici présentes de porter des pantalons moins larges et des cagoules plus longues, qu'elles couvrent bien leurs cheveux et qu'elles ne se maquillent pas. Quelqu'un a-t-il une question? Sinon, la séance est levée. Oui?
Vous dites que nos cagoules sont courtes, que nos pantalons sont indécents, que nous nous maquillons, etc., etc. En tant qu'étudiante en art, une bonne partie de mon temps se passe à l'atelier. J'ai besoin de liberté de geste afin de pouvoir dessiner. Une cagoule plus longue rend la tâche encore plus difficile. En ce qui concerne nos pantalons, vous leur reprochez d'être trop larges alors qu'ils cachent efficacement nos formes. Sachant que ces pantalons sont actuellement en vogue, je pose la question. La religion défend-elle notre intégrité physique ou s'oppose-t-elle simplement à la mode? Vous n'hésitez pas à nous faire des remarques, or, les frères ici présents ont toute forme de coiffure et d'habillement. Parfois, ils mettent des vêtements tellement serrés qu'on arrive même à voir leurs dessous. Comment se fait-il que moi, en tant que femme, je ne puisse rien éprouver en regardant ces messieurs moulés de partout, mais que, en tant qu'homme, puisse s'exciter sur nos quelques centimètres de cagoule en moins?
Ah, c'est bien. C'est comme si tu leur avais coupé leur petite bite. S'il te plaît, enlève cette saloperie de cagoule. Ça me rend claustrophobe.
Je finis par oublier que je l'ai sur la tête.
N'oublie jamais ça. C'est la peur qui nous fait perdre notre conscience. C'est aussi elle qui nous transforme en lâches. Tu as eu du cœur. Je suis fière de toi.
C'était magique. Mamie, comment tu fais pour avoir des seins aussi ronds à ton âge?
Je les mets 10 minutes chacun dans un bol d'eau glacée tous les jours.
Tu me manqueras.
Je viendrai te voir. Écoute, je n'aime pas te faire la morale, mais je vais te donner un conseil qui te servira à jamais. Dans la vie, tu rencontreras beaucoup de cons. S'ils te blessent, dis-toi que c'est la bêtise qui les pousse à te faire du mal. Ça t'évitera de répondre à leur méchanceté. Car il n'y a rien de pire au monde que l'amertume et la vengeance. Reste toujours digne et intègre à toi-même.
Through the protagonist's own stories and tales, she informs the world of what it was like living in a country where women were oppressed and when the idea of finding a personal identity was nearly impossible. Through her trials and triumphs, she finds comfort and guidance within her family and friends, and through this, she was able to be free in a country where freedom was no longer an option.
Through the author's eyes, the reader is placed in Iran during not only the revolution that turned the country upside down, but as well as during a time of conflict in which this newly formed nation was in a fight for its very existence.
Because of their opposition of the Shah, she and her family came to support the revolution, and the book explains how they thought it would bring about democracy. However, they came about to find that the result was a fundamentalist Islamic republic that was more repressive than they could ever imagine.